Hey, I'm Blake Smith.
And I'm Matt King.
And we are the Video Island Podcast.
That's right. And on today's episode, we'll be talking about the unsung heroes of your video, like the audio and visual effects that go unnoticed if done well.
Key word, if done well. All right, so as you said in the intro, we're going to be talking about the unsung heroes when it comes to video production. And those unsung heroes being, CG, like computer generated graphics, audio,
Slippery, sneaky editing.
slippery, sneaky, what was that, sorry? Slippery,
Sneaky editing.
slippery, sneaky editing.
Yeah. That's stuff that you wouldn't otherwise realize happened, but it happened on the back end.
Yeah, and so pretty much like in a nutshell, it's pretty much stuff that, does require quite a bit of time and effort to make sure that, whatever it is that you're achieving, whether it's something visually or sound, that it sounds almost natural, realistic, without, you even noticing.
Yeah.
I guess just to kind of, share an example would be, I use this example all the time when I'm talking about this topic with people. I'm pretty sure it was the show 24, with our boy Kiefer Sutherland, Canadian boy Kiefer Sutherland, what's his name in 24?
Jack
Bauer. Jack Bauer, that's it. So I knew it was something to do with hockey.
Yeah.
Bauer is a hockey brand for those who don't know. Anyways, Jack Bauer and I think someone else, I don't know, they're sitting on the steps of a White House, or of the White House, not of a White House. But they're sitting on the steps of the White House and, it looks realistic. It looks like as if they're sitting on the steps of the White House. But in reality, it's all green screen. It's them sitting on like prop steps that do look like the steps of White House. They're not that big. But then the rest of it is all green screen, or not even the rest of it's green screen. It's them like sitting somewhere randomly. It's just that they're keyed out and the rest is just computer generated.
That's right.
But why they had to do that is because there's no way in hell that they would be allowed to bring an entire crew and film on the front steps of the White House, right? And, the fact that it looks so realistic and whatnot, people it doesn't even process that required, all this time and effort to, set up the green screen and the rigs to, pull that off and then bring it into, post-production and do all the compositing and whatnot with lighting and 3D renders and then exporting that to add it to the final edit, which you would then see on TV.
Right.
And it's just those things, right? When it comes to, I guess, computer-generated graphics per se, that when it's something that's so believable or doesn't, go beyond the realm of reality, it's just subconsciously your brain's just telling you that's what it's supposed to be. That's just it's natural.
It doesn't even register that it's something fake. It wasn't. It was something artificial, which is definitely that's the key of good CG and that kind of stuff for sure. And it seems like something so obvious. It's like obviously you want it to look seamless, but pretty sure we can all think of times that you're watching a movie or a show or whatever and you're looking at just like a dumpster fire in terms of like CG work. And you're like, wow. Not to mention sometimes the budget allocated towards, movies. I've seen some pretty like high budget movies and the work done in it are just been like, holy moly. And then how did that, how is this allowed? You know what I mean? This is terrible.
Yeah, and that also obviously comes down to time and money, and a lot of factors do come into that, right? And a prime example, and I guess the other thing with CG, right, is if that computer generated element is beyond the realm of reality, then you're just automatically being like, that's clearly fake.
Yeah. Something in your head gets thrown off, and sometimes you don't always know what it is, but something you're looking at it, you're like, this doesn't look right.
But even in those situations where it is like, this is clearly an animal or an alien, whatever it be, or even a spaceship that clearly does not exist in the real world, can still be pulled off and look really well done. Like an example that obviously is not a real thing, but looked terrible. Even like there's some CG like from the time, like from old movies where at the time was bueno. Like that it was like
done right.
That was done right. Whereas you look back at it now and it's like, ooh, okay, that doesn't look that great.
Sure.
But an example that sticks out of my head, even at the time when the movie was released, was terrible. Was what's it called? The Mummy, when with Dwayne the Rock Johnson.
The Scorpion King.
No, but wasn't it The Mummy though? It was The Mummy because they did make the movie after called The Scorpion King. That was the own standalone movie.
Okay, yeah. What was like a follow-up to The Mummy, like The Mummy Returns?
I think it was like, I don't know if it was like the second one or the third one. I can't remember.
And The Rock is part like scorpion.
Yeah, and he comes out as a scorpion monster, and it's just like
so bad.
So bad, even at the time. Yeah. Whereas like, and obviously this was years ago. Like what? 10 years ago? I don't know. I can't.
It was like early 2000s.
So, sure. And so obviously, 10, 20 years later, like obviously the technology has gone beyond in advance. But like today though, like even with like the Avengers, like how they in Infinity War, like how they pulled off Thanos, or even with and that's a character that's clearly not a real character, but how they're able to take the actor, so Josh Brolin playing Thanos, and being able to pull off the CG with that character to not only one portray the actor who's playing him, because when you look at Thanos in the movie, you're like, that's Josh Brolin.
That's right.
But on top of that, to actually convey that, it actually looks real. Like it looks really, really good, even though it's not real.
Yeah, those motion capture suits and facial, camera markers and all that kind of stuff make a huge difference in terms of, capturing somebody's actual body movement. It still takes obviously a little bit more work to kind of work out some of those kinks once it's now in like kind of a 3D space. But definitely then the next big lift obviously is like texturing and lighting. Yeah. Texturing being a big factor. I feel like in that example of The Rock, for people who haven't seen it, I highly encourage you to kind of YouTube it or watch the movie. It's kind of a fun movie, but that part really kind of falls off the end. But it's lacking texture on the surfaces of the skin and the claws, and it's just the motion is not really realistic enough of like the body movement, and it just looks like the facial movements are really weird. So it's kind of like watching a video game character just slapped in in a movie, and you're kind of like, this looks weird. Like it just looks strange. So.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's where it's like the physics come into play, and I think lately now, and that's why they've gone the route with doing motion tracking, actually having actors portray these characters, because it allows them to have a reference point.
Yeah. Take a look at the Planet of the Apes movies.
That's exactly what I was gonna get. Andy Serkis, whether he is Gollum or what's the other name of Smeagol in Lord of the Rings. Yeah. He plays Caesar in Planet of the Apes.
Unbelievable.
Like so good, right?
Yeah, the lighting in that. And I think definitely it's one of those arguments that like it's harder to pull off some of those like the blending of CG in daytime scenes, and they kind of proved you wrong, because they had scenes where there's the bridge attack between like the different ape species, and they're fighting on the bridge and all that kind of stuff, and that was during the day. But like it really shines obviously as night, because you can use the darkness to kind of mask some of the effects a little bit more. Yeah. And either way, like that's an awesome example of just like unbelievable motion capture technology mixed with like great performance by an actor that gets into the role, because he's having to move like an ape to pull it all off, much less the rest of the characters doing the same thing. So pretty cool stuff. I think that's the stuff, right? So I think the trick obviously at the end of this, as we keep talking, is like, the job of people within video production and making movies and things like that is like, obviously it's like there's a lot of stuff that we have to do behind the scenes. It's like the stuff that you see and is maybe left on the cutting room floor or whatever, it's kind of like we have to try and make things look a little bit more believable as best we can, or mask some things, hide some issues that maybe have come up along the way. So that's the task.
So like even so in our situation, because we obviously don't work in film and we're not in Hollywood working on these big blockbuster movies, but even these types of things do apply in our work. I was just talking to you prior to recording this how I had a perfect example for this was it was a video that we were doing to promote a recharge lounge that we were sponsoring. And the premise, it was like a skit-based video, and the whole premise of the video was that two guys were on the phone, and they're supposed to meet in San Francisco at this conference. It was a summit of some sort. So I thought it'd be funny to play off this situation where the one character is at a
conference.
Well, no, it wasn't at a conference. He was grabbing a coffee at a Starbucks or something like that,
right,
near the conference. Whereas the other individual, and it was, I can't remember, it's a couple years old now, but the other individual was on the other end of the phone he was on the summit of a mountain.
Yeah.
Because he's the doofus of the two, and you meant that summit. Regardless, we wanted to play off the fact that they're on each other's phone, or they're on their phones, and there was a shot where the individual who's going into the cafe or whatever looks at his phone, and his phone's supposed to be dead, because what happens at the end of the video is that his phone dies, and obviously, what's the purpose of a recharge lounge is to obviously charge your phone and other devices, which is surprisingly or not a hot commodity at conferences, because you're on your phone or on your laptop, iPad, whatever it be, all day, and you need some source of power, and conference halls don't really have that. Anyways, so when we were filming that, obviously the phone was not near dead, because that would just be kind of silly to go into production with the phone that's almost dead, and it's like, well, what if it died? Then we're kind of euchred, right? And it was a shot, like, I got my phone right here, so like, it was just an over-the-shoulder shot, holding the phone, and so it wasn't like anything extreme close-up or anything of the battery icon on the phone, but I had to go into After Effects in post-production, and I found, like, just in Google Images or something like that, and found like a dead battery icon, and I had to bring that in and motion track that shot, like apply that image in there, and then composite it to match the coloring and the lighting, all that stuff, and I had to blend it into that shot to match. And I'm not trying to toot my own horn here, but I did it pretty well, that it looked believable. It looked like the actual battery icon on the phone, and it was something that was so small, and a lot of people didn't really notice it per se.
They probably wouldn't care. They'd be like, oh, okay, the phone's dead.
Yeah.
The phone's dying.
They didn't really think much of it, and it kind of goes back to our earlier point, right? It's nothing beyond the realm of reality, and it's just like, they probably just recorded their phone dead or almost dead with the camera.
But for a practical reason, on a film shoot, you can't necessarily have that. So
Exactly.
like you said, you need that juice, because you need the phone to be used for whatever reason, so you can't have that.
Exactly. And at the end but the other thing too is also, when you're filming, like, you have glare and whatnot, right? So it's better to, and if at least if you know how to do this stuff, it's better just to do it in post, because then, you avoid glare and reflection.
You're saying don't rely on whatever's on the screen during the shoot.
During the shoot, and then apply the stuff in post.
Everything that's on the screen.
I'm saying, if you know how to do that. Because if you don't know how to do that, then
you motion capture it, and then or motion track it, and then the phone, and then overlay the graphic on top to make it look like.
So with this example, we actually recorded the phone as is because we had decent lighting. I was prepared for both situations. Yeah. But it worked out to keep it on there because it just meant
time saver.
It meant less work.
Yeah.
I still had to go in and obviously do that thing with the battery icon. Yeah. But with all that said and done, it was necessary. It was needed, right? It did take me, a couple of, I can't remember off the top of my head, probably like 2 hours to do. But it was necessary, and it was a very small detail, but within the plot of the video or the story of the video, it was necessary because it was to promote the fact that, we have a lounge that's going to recharge your phone or whatever devices, and in this said story, this character's phone dies, so it was vital to the story. And so not having that in there would obviously, not have helped. Right. So that I think is an example right there where, being the individual who had to put the work into it, and then showing my peers and people who watched it, it's one of those things that goes unrecognized, but is definitely needed.
It's very much it goes unrecognized, but if it was wrong, it would be recognized immediately.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That's where a lot of our kind of work falls into. It's like if you do it wrong, it's far easier to pick it up versus if you do it right.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, and that's me with like motion tracking, like we've been doing a lot of that lately. For those who don't know what motion tracking is, it's, taking something, some plane, surface, whatever it be, and then, so whether the camera's moving, you're pretty much taking that shot into post-production and then having, the software process that footage and, pretty much take that information, whatever that point is, so you could put in track points into the video yourself, or in the situation where this is something you need to do after the fact, you just try to find a point in the video to use as a track point.
And anyways, high contrast.
Exactly.
Like that.
So anyways, the software or the software will then, will take that point and then do its best to kind of interpolate that, and then will give you the data to then apply it to whatever visual element that you want to put on that surface.
To match the
motion of the camera, or maybe the camera's static, but as you can see here, if you're watching, I'm moving the book around, and you can see there's the logo on the book, but we want to replace that logo. That's what the tracking would do.
It's like you pick a target within your scene, and then you motion track that target so that you can overlay something, text, image, whatever, to be in direct movement with that target that you tracked its motion of, so that everything sticks where it's supposed to stick. Because if you don't have that and you're doing it manually, it'll be off and it'll look kind of jarring
and very jarring, janky,
and done.
And then in that situation, it draws the attention to it,
for sure,
and looks worse.
Yeah, for sure.
Right,
yeah.
And it goes back to like the whole point of this, whereas something that's done well will go unnoticed.
Yeah.
Yeah, when it's done terrible, that's the only thing
Every
noticed.
single time.
Right?
Yeah.
And same thing applies with audio, right?
Yeah.
So like with audio, think of it as like Foley effects and whatnot, right? On movies. Well, even think of that. Like, I know we've talked about another episode where it's, you're using like, especially on like film sets and whatnot, you're using, say, a cinematic camera, like a Red or something like that. That camera does not record the audio. So unless you are, have someone there recording the audio for you, you sometimes have to recreate that audio.
Yeah. So for the most part, obviously, you're gonna have like a sound engineer and other people that are like the people recording the audio. You see that person that puts mics on the actors or the subjects. They have often they'll operate kind of a boom with a shotgun microphone on to capture the sound, but that's a separate thing that needs to be kind of layered together in post-production. So that's why you see a slate on movie sets with all the It's like the black and white striped thing. It's got all the details of the shot, the scene, the director, blah, 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 and then they slap it so that they have the visual representation of the slate closing and slamming closed, and then they'll have the audio spike from the external audio source. They take the visual of the slate closing and pair that with their audio file, and they see the spike in the audio, and they pair those two up, and that's how you sync your audio in post, kind of thing. But obviously the slate also gives reference to the scene and the take and the cut, all that kind of stuff. So that's good, information for an editor to figure out what they're looking at too. So that's obviously the other benefit of it. But yeah, definitely it's one of those circumstances that, in a poor audio scenario, you kind of have to like make up some of that audio, or, you need to emphasize. A lot of it isn't just emphasizing and adding, a little bit of extra to a scene, right? So it's like you have like an action scene. Well, you're going to add in slaps and punches and kicks and slams and things breaking, which is all foley, more or less. That you either get somebody in your crew to produce, using whatever kind of funky tools you have.
So before you dive into that, just for our audience, in the case they don't know what foley is. Do you mind explaining what Foley effects are?
Foley effects are basically just kind of like sound effects or additional effects that are the recreation of sounds that you'd hear in a scenario. So if you look up Foley effects, or Foley sound effects kind of thing, you'll see that, it's usually you can find libraries of like, person walking in gravel, some like some crazy stuff like bones breaking, and it's obviously not typically bones breaking. It's somebody recreating that noise by other means. So you'll see like in a Foley artist's like studio, they're using like things like body parts breaking, celery, and they kind of like snap it slowly, which it could be like a kind of a recreation with the right kind of effects layered on of like bone breaking, or like they'll take certain materials because they find that maybe they're not getting the most like adequate audio by just recording boots walking on the ground, on gravel, and they want that sound of like footsteps on gravel, and they need to find some other material that emphasizes the sound of the gravel a little bit more. So sometimes it's not like a direct recreation of like a sound that you want in a scene, maybe it's like a war film and they're walking on like a sandy beach or whatever, and then the material changes under their feet. Well, you have to recreate that for the audience, right? So it's up to that Foley artist or a great Foley library to be able to pull from to find those sounds and make that happen. And again, it's very much one of those things. It's like when you're watching a movie, you just anticipate those sounds to be there, but like that's an entire layer of the editing process, is adding in all of those little sounds.
Yeah, exactly.
Like light switches, car starting, everything. Like all those little things are more often than not added in post-production kind of thing as a separate sound. So, and it's on us too when we're doing higher level campaign videos, even for our work, if we're doing something a little bit more funky or skip based, we have to do kind of that same process where we kind of like isolate sounds if it's important to our scene. So like we've done it recently where, we have like a stuffed animal kind of like hitting on like a table, but then we'll get like a secondary kind of take for our audio professional who's on set to be able to like get up close with the shotgun microphone and record the same sound of that impact. So we could use that if we want to, if we didn't necessarily want to go and get Foley and pay for that. So it's all those little things, right? But again, if that sound wasn't there and you just see this thing kind of like hit the table and you're not really getting like a sound to kind of really represent that, and particularly if it's supposed to be emphasized because it means something to that scene, you're going to be missing something, and your brain might not always understand why, but like you'll know something's off. So I'm sure there's probably on YouTube you can watch videos that's like Foley stripped from a scene, and just watch it and you'll kind of understand more of what we're talking about. It's like if you pull those sounds out, how it affects how a scene comes together. It's like it's very weird.
Well, so Matt and I actually went to school together, and that was a project of ours that we did, and that was a project for us when we were in college. And if you feel like trying it yourself, by all means, just do what Matt said: is find a scene and just remove all the audio from it. It's probably easier if you find a scene that doesn't have dialogue.
Yeah, that's a little bit more fun, I find. Rather than having to like dub dialogue or overdub dialogue, it's like more fun to get into a scene that's like action based or something like that.
But yeah, so if you were to do that, it will really open your eyes on like all, and just take that clip, you know, and then just try to source all those sounds that you think that would, you know, fit the scene. And then compare with the original, right? And it's actually like...
It's pretty unbelievable.
Like, you think, like... Because when we did it, like... I don't know, I thought ours were reasonably well. But there's just so many layers that you miss.
And just...
Like, ambient tones, like, just the minor details of, like... I don't know, like the scene that we didn't do the same thing, but the same project, but the scene that I did was from the first Transformers movie, and it was the scene where the scorpion's jumping out of the sand, and it's just, but there's this part of the scene where it goes slow-mo, and so it's like adding that element of complexity of like, this is the sound, but then now adding it, distorting it to sound like it's in slow-mo. But you have like the whole thing of the individuals running around in the sand, you have the guns going off, you have this massive robot jumping in and out of the sand.
All of the mechanical noises.
There was signs falling down, and it's just, it really, you know, draws the attention to all the minor details.
For sure. Definitely if it's something that you're kind of getting into or interested in, I'd say that's a fantastic practice, because it's actually a lot of fun. I found that project to be a lot of fun in terms of just audio editing, of, you know, balancing, not only just getting all those sounds and throwing them in and finding like where perhaps you are missing sounds and where there's kind of like empty spaces where there should be supporting sound that you didn't realize that is actually in the original cut, but even balancing, you know what I mean? Balancing your audio so that you have, like you said, you kind of have your undertones, your ambient sounds, but then you have your midtones, and then you have like your highlight, your peaks, you know, you have those sounds that are supposed to be kind of like impacting and hard and heavy, you know, those are going to be like higher up in the decibels, kind of thing like that. So it's like all those little things that you start to kind of figure out, like not every sound is supposed to like lay on the same plane.
And then you got to think of like the environment too, of like what they're in, right? Because then that obviously plays off, like, you know, is there echo, the reverb, all like, like audio itself is like a world of its own.
It's such a monster.
We could probably do an audio, well, not us per se, because we're not the audio experts, but there could be an audio island podcast.
Right. Yeah, we
just
know
about
I think we know enough to be dangerous, but like there's
for all the things that you could cover in the audio world.
Unbelievable engineers out there in audio. There's just like what, like I learned previously about like the different colors of noise. Like people just think like white noise, but there's like pink noise, blue noise, red noise, purple noise, like gray noise, like all those, like, like what's pink noise? It's like, well, it's a certain frequency, and you know what I mean, you have to have that in to recreate this kind of sound. It's like, what? Like, and meanwhile you'd hit like pink noise sample and you're like, I don't hear anything. But like to an engineer, it probably means something in a specific field, and you're like, what? So it's crazy. But either way, we're kind of getting back to that point of just like, you know, those are those things again that you kind of go unnoticed. So like, you know, audio in our world kind of consists of within like, you know, video for business, it's like, you know, we're very much balancing quite often, you know, a music track mixed with dialogue or just a voice, you know, maybe it's not two people talking, but it's just one person kind of presenting information. So there's kind of important factors there in terms of, you know, I think if I were to just slap in the music and slap in my what I recorded for my from my on-camera talent for their voice, and I just slap that together without any kind of like, you know, adjusting, it would probably be, you probably wouldn't want to listen to it, you know? So when I pull in music, oftentimes the music tracks are very strong. They're giving a lot of kind of variation in terms of their decibel range, because it's just how music is. It has highs and lows and in-betweens, all that kind of stuff. But if I weren't to adjust the volume of that, just as a starting point, it would be directly competing with the volume in which my person would be speaking. So that's one of those things that just is like an obvious, but it goes just like underappreciated, right? Is like balancing my audio, my music to be at a certain level so that it's not competing with my voice, but it's still there, right? Not to mention it's like, okay, there's things I need to do to my voice. You know, I play with the dynamics of an individual's voice by adding that effect on. so that I can kind of compress their audio so that they have less highs and lows. You know, maybe they're talking at this tone, but then next point they're kind of talking like this. It's like, well, that very mild change in volume over the course of like a longer video can kind of be a brutal listening experience, particularly if there's a kind of a peak in the music that's a little bit higher at one point too. Even though I've kind of controlled the levels there, you could still have competing sound. So I have to kind of compress my audio of my voice and raise all that sound up so that it's kind of at a more acceptable level, but it's consistently at a certain kind of level of decibels. Again, there's other effects like, you know, I add a little bit of bass and a little bit more just to beef up the person's sound so that they're a little bit more present and there's a little bit more resonance so that they sound fuller. You know, without those things, people can end up, depending on the environment that they're in, sound a little hollow. Sometimes you're doing noise reduction, so maybe they're in like kind of a noisy environment, and that's where I have to shoot them in. Like I don't have a choice. I'm getting rid of the ambient sound in the room. So maybe there's an HVAC system that's kind of directly competing with a certain frequency in their voice. It's on me to, when I'm recording my interview, for example, being aware of hearing that ventilation sound kind of blowing in and hitting my ears through the microphone. I have to make sure that I get like a 10-second like snip of that audio with nobody speaking, so that I can directly use that as a reference clip to isolate that background ventilation sound and remove it using a noise reducer effect and pull that out of my interview sound. So you can kind of, it's a really cool tool and it works really well if you're kind of delicate with it. And then it, you know, we get rid of that kind of like high hissing kind of noise that's kind of in the background of sound. So those little things that you do, it's like, it goes unnoticed, but if it's in there with like a lot of and it's kind of in the background, it's less of an enjoyable listening experience. Some people don't always know why, they just don't, they don't like the sound of what they're listening to. But if you broke it down, that's oftentimes some of the reason is like low, and there's not a lot of, you know, meat to their voice, there's maybe some hiss in the background, maybe the music's a little too high. If you don't do those steps, it's like, okay, well, you're missing out on making things sound as good as they can. That's not even to touch on like the video aspect of things too, right? So there's things within video that come up that are like very minor and like kind of a day-to-day thing, but like color correction. You know, I think I've spoken about it before in the past that color correction is such an important step because particularly as you get into certain cameras, it's our choice to shoot in what we call a flatter picture profile. So what that essentially means is that it gives us the ability in editing to pull out the colors a little bit more and correct things and then potentially color grade things a little bit more. I can kind of talk about that later. But effectively, it's like the more control we have in the editing, the better the outcome will be in terms of the visual quality and the colors and the contrast and all that kind of stuff. And so I find that people often miss that step when they're getting into video of just recording something and being like that looks good enough, and then they just export it and then upload the video like that. It's like, well, you need to always color correct your footage because there's little things that you can change within the background in terms of contrast or, you know, the person's skin tone, all that kind of stuff can be even mildly changed in editing to make a serious difference to the visual quality.
Before we, because that is our last topic is editing, and
what was I doing? I'm jumping ahead.
Before we jump ahead, I just want to talk about the last thing I wanted to kind of riff on with audio. And I have both an example for, you know, the film world, but then also kind of back down to, when doing producing video for business, is when you have something that is conceptual and trying to make a sound that fits that. So from the business standpoint, you know, the example being motion graphic videos. So you have motion graphic videos that, you know, maybe it's an explainer video and you're explaining, you know, a product, or maybe it's, you know, a video that's going to kick off an event, and the elements that you're using are more conceptual opposed to something, you know, real, and you want to go take it a little bit further and not just have voiceover and audio, or maybe in the and by audio I mean music, but maybe in the situation you don't have a voiceover and you need that kind of, you need to add more texture when it comes to the audio, and just having a music track, it just kind of seems pretty empty. So looking at those elements and trying to determine what those what sounds would match that, and that itself, is tricky, because it's really, because, the sky's the limit, because the element that you've created visually is conceptual, so the audio to match that is conceptual. So
your oyster, there's no predetermined tone or sound.
And and a real good example in the film side of things that which relates to this, that when it's done really well, was, I can't remember the individual's name, but he was the sound engineer on Jurassic Park and Jurassic World, all the Jurassic Park movies, and what he did to create the roar of the T-Rex was he pretty much took the sound of an elephant seal and a baboon and all these different animals and layered them together and tweaked them and whatnot to make what we hear today in Jurassic Park. And because of that movie and what he created there is now what we expect to hear from a dinosaur. Nobody has ever heard a T-Rex roar.
No.
Obviously, because they're extinct.
Yeah, it could just sound like, ah!
Imagine that.
Yeah, that'd be kind of wimpy.
But it just comes to show that taking something that, that is the unknown and pulling something in to, associate with that concept, that is a prime example of something done really well that obviously has stuck with everyone that is now associated. So even in the sake of motion graphics, you could have a ball bounce and then it's just a circle bouncing across the screen or something like that. But then you also have to think, and it goes back to kind of the environment and whatnot, and what fits best that matches all the other sound effects is the ball big or small? Right. So then you got to think of the pitch and the tone, and then again, is the space that it's in, is it really big? So do you need to add echo? You yourself, when we did that motion graphic video that kicked off the event, it was very conceptual with just minimal designs with lines and circles and dots, but it had a space theme to it, and so we had things that simulated a flashlight and whatnot, so that kind of helped drive the direction of the sound effects. But still, it's open for interpretation.
Totally.
On what those sound effects you use. So it just goes right there where, just to kind of tie this all together in regards to kind of the unsung heroes when it comes to audio engineering, audio editing and whatnot, is that you could have the situation where, yes, exactly what sound you're looking for, but where do you source that from, and how do you, tie that in to match the source? But then at the same time, you also have those elements that are more conceptual, and then how do you interpret what that would sound like when you don't really know?
That's right.
So people who can do that, just in my books, really, that's a home run right there.
That's right. Yeah, your brain thinks a different way, because you can look at an expanding circle. It goes from it's not there on screen, then all of a sudden it pops up. It goes whoop. Immediately to me, right? I made the noise right there. Whoop. So there's that growth sound, right?
Yeah. Or it could be the stretching of an elastic, right?
Right. So it's okay, depending on the video and the context and the theme and the mood and the the vibe, everything like that. What's that? It comes down to cues, right? So you need in a motion graphic video, you need that cue, you need that audible cue to capture somebody's attention, to pay more attention to that specific thing on frame.
Exactly.
So what is that going to sound like? It's a challenge. Sometimes it's what am I supposed to do here? And I need there's something, but there isn't something necessarily that I can create this noise with immediately that makes the most sense. So you have to really kind of dig deep. But that's part of the fun. Like I said, that's part of the challenge. So if you can pull that off and make something that works, then if people just don't really see it as jarring, then you've done a good job.
Yeah.
So like I said, it's if we watched Jurassic Park and you saw one of the T-Rexes go, ah! like I'm pretty sure it would be a comedy movie then, right? People would be like, oh, that's not right.
It definitely would.
So you have to kind of like steer into that kind of like that vibe that you're trying to give off.
Exactly,
so,
exactly. So let's talk about what you were so eager to talk about.
I'm sorry. Listen, next time I start getting ahead of myself, just like pinch me or something. Just like kick me under the table or something.
Ah, my shin!
Ow! Why are you kicking me?
So lastly, let's kind of talk about these types of things, those things that go unnoticed in the realm of editing. And I guess editing, that is kind of
broad term.
Yeah, but it is kind of an underlining premise of editing is to, because if you're shooting a scene and, you have all these different angles, obviously it depends on what the scene is. Sequentially, like, there's an order to it.
Yeah. Right?
But in reality, maybe you shot that scene over a span of 2 days, or you shot it completely out of order, right? It could be in the situation where you shot this one part of that scene in one location and you had to then shoot somewhere else. And to make that seem like it's one location or it was all done in one go, just speaks for itself, right?
Yeah. And that's multiple things playing into it too, right? So not only is it like being able to be crafty with how you're editing that scene together, but obviously comes from, good kind of set awareness when you're shooting, right? So paying attention to, what's in your scene, what do people look like, what are people wearing, right?
Matching of lighting.
Yeah, matching, the lighting matches, the space, all that kind of stuff. In our world, we have less of that worry, but definitely when you're kind of creating like a skip-based thing, which we do, it still becomes a factor, right? Because depending on our shoot day, we have to shoot things out of order to kind of nail things down in a certain way. Or it makes more sense to start with like a series of these wide shots and then move to our medium shots next.
So you don't have to
to reframe back up in the wide shot and try and shoot in order. Sometimes, sometimes we can conveniently get away with shooting in order, but other times, like you said, you storyboard it out and you realize, okay, like it makes more sense to shot list this in chunks based on my, what I'm required to take. For example, in the idea that we did the Halloween video. So in that example, we shot it in my backyard around a campfire. The scene was monsters around a campfire. And so one factor that played into that was it didn't make a whole lot of sense to try and keep a little fire going at the same intensity for each time we needed to be on a close-up on a different individual and try and maintain that, because we wanted that flickering to be the main source of light on that person, along with a light off to the side that was casting a bit of light on that person, acting as kind of like the moonlight, right? So you had your moonlight, which was just kind of like a highlight, and then you had the fire light being the flickering, inconsistent light there being your main source kind of for that subject when you're on a close-up or a medium shot of somebody. Well, it didn't make a lot of sense to necessarily go ahead and shoot that. And like I said, trying to maintain a fire the whole time. So it made more sense that we started out of order by shooting our close-ups for the day first. Or for that night first. So at that night, we went from person to person to person, capturing all of their lines. And we used one of our lights, and our light has a dimmer on it. So I got you to operate the light, flickering the dimmer, kind of inconsistent. Yeah, and we put a red gel in front of the light to kind of give off that kind of warmer cast light. And then I got you to kind of like inconsistently kind of flicker it within a certain percentage range that kind of seemed like it would be kind of reminiscent of what a fire would give off, right? And then that, I think it really pulled off that effect. That,
well, it did, because people who watched it thought it was a real fire.
Had no idea. So, and then what we did then obviously is at the end of our shoot is when we actually started a fire, because we were getting our wide shots then. So then you can actually see the fire in between this grouping of characters. So that's when it became less about, casting light on their face per se, and more on the overall scene and the space. So, and then when it comes to the editing, you're having to, start off with my wide shot to establish the scene, then cut to a close-up to somebody, then to cut to another close-up, and then back to a medium shot, and you can still see the fire in the scene, or whatever. Those little things, again, it would go unnoticed. It's like, well, okay, we probably just shot in a very specific way, and the fire was going the whole time. But it's like those sneaky little things that you can do.
Well,
Well, that make a big difference.
Yeah, and even with the audio too, with that you got to think too, and like these are all like just techniques when it comes to editing. But even just these shots that were out of order, but it's even when it comes to the editing floor, it's just like you can take the track of somebody talking and have that underline another shot, even though that shot was filmed like maybe an hour later after that line of dialogue was recorded, right?
Yeah.
And so just given, you know, the sequencing of the editing and whatnot, and again using the audio to, you know, overlap into that next scene helps kind of establish or portray that, you know,
this is happening all in one fluid, like this to this to this. It wasn't shot out of order. Yeah, and you'll see that a lot when you're watching a movie or a TV show, for example, and you'll see them cut to what we call an over-the-shoulder shot. So what you'll have is that you're getting your camera's view is pointed at somebody, but it's from the direction of basically, like you might see that the two actors and they're having a conversation across the table from another, for example, and then the camera is over the one person's shoulder shooting towards the other character. And then they flip it to get the other person's response back the other way, kind of thing. So that standard over the shoulder, oftentimes, if they need to kind of cover up a line or, you know, change things up, is that they'll have the person talking, but then they'll switch to that person's over the shoulder shot pointing at the other person and for the reaction, but sometimes it's not from the same shot, right? So sometimes it's like they didn't have two cameras set up, they just had the one. So you're cutting away and hoping that you're not seeing too much of that person's face or their mouth to see that they weren't actually saying what they were saying at the time. Sometimes films do it better than others. Sometimes
have you seen it where the person's talking?
Oh yeah, it's like way off. Like not moving, or it's like totally different. If you're like a decent mouth reader, sometimes you can be like, yeah, that's like not even close to what they actually said in that moment.
Or they're not even talking at all yet. Yeah. You can hear them talking.
But for most people, that's like a little trick to kind of cut that kind of scene together. And they obviously felt during editing that they needed that reaction, so they needed to cut that shot and flip it over or something. So that's like a good way of doing it, is like you're masking that. And for most cases, it works pretty well.
Yeah.
To go along the lines of, you know, that Halloween example again, it's like, you know, to bring all of these shots kind of together, and in the instance that, you know, we didn't have a fire started, is that we had to record the sound effects of the fire during the shoot. Once we actually started to get close on the fire, and then I used that fire of the crackle and everything, and I looped it underneath in low volume to kind of, you know, establish that the fire was actually going the whole time, right? And it's one of those things, again, it's like obviously there's a fire going, it's like, but there actually wasn't. It was just like some sneaky deaky editing to kind of make that seem like it was. So it's little things like that kind of go a long way.
Well, sorry, not to cut you off, but like even like a very, very simple example of just things that will go unnoticed if done right, like both from the visual and audio side of things, is because even if you blend so say you have an interview, you're talking, you know, you have the talking head, that's your A track, and then, you know, you're cutting out those sections, you're cutting out the sound bites that you want in the video, and you're stitching those all together. Obviously you want to hide those jump cuts, so then you then overlay with B-roll, right? Now, if you're taking those sound bites at the right moment and then have enough, you know, you're not like splicing too close together, or you're cutting them off when they're not naturally taking a breath and they flow together. And with the use of B-roll, it could seem like, because if it sounds fine all the way through, because that's that underlining thing that keeps it connected while watching the B-roll. If that could all seem seamless, at least from the audio, and then having the B-roll over top, that 1 minute interview that was maybe 10 minutes long could seem like that was literally one entire take, whereas maybe that's what it was you took 6 different clips and condensed it down to 1 minute. And that right there is a very simplified version of, you know, taking editing and doing it well that the viewer doesn't even notice the breaks in the edit.
That's a big factor too, and that's a delicate factor in terms of, like, you know, you'll have people saying that I was interviewed and I'm being misrepresented and that's not what I said or that's not what I meant. It's because the editor took the liberty or they intentionally, went ahead and made this person say something else.
It's reality TV in a nutshell right there.
Exactly. Watch most reality TV or like any of that stuff and it's so like cut out of place that you're like, all right. But if you know it, it's one of those things that like ruins it for you and you're like, all right, like you don't believe any of it because you're like, this is clearly out of context. Yeah. But, and it can be almost like a legality thing depending on like the severity or if like it's directly dealing with like pretty serious issues. Misrepresenting what somebody says, you know what I mean, is something that can be a very delicate thing. So it's our job to make sure that whatever we're editing somebody to say, it's still representative of their thought and we're just not making something that they wouldn't have said themselves, right? So it's a very delicate kind of thing. So, but it's tricky. So, but it's definitely necessary when it comes down to whittling down what could otherwise be a very long interview.
Yeah, and like in the whole reality TV example is like, that's a great example right there just to show like if you are really good at it and do it well, you can totally change the narrative.
And they do it all the time. They do it all the time. That's how most reality TV is made. They like make people say things that they didn't actually say.
But it's believable because people buy into that character and like, oh, that person's a jerk. And in reality, it's like, well, no, they're not.
Chances are they asked them about something entirely different, and then they cut that clip in and went, wow.
Exactly.
Like, that's what I think about that person. It's like, okay, they're actually talking about whether or not they like cilantro. They're like, that's garbage, or like, I totally like whatever, you know what I mean? They just like totally like splice it in there. My wife loves reality TV stuff, and sometimes I get into it. I'm like, okay, but like, it's so formulaic now. It's just like,
it can be painful to watch.
Yeah, it's a little tough, but you see it all the time. So that's kind of how you can kind of use editing to influence a thought and make it sound like it was one statement, right? Whereas in fact it was like something said over like the course of an entire interview process, right? So it's kind of sneaky like that. I've used, there's other things within editing that are kind of like really good tricks that I found. As the technology gets better, it becomes that much easier to be able to kind of pull off a certain thing and get away with it, right? So there's something within Adobe Premiere, which is the editing software we use, called like the morph cut or morph dissolve.
Yeah, it's the morph cut. Yeah.
Morph cut. And that's been like kind of a saver in just a couple instances. It's got to be used, it's like a very intense spice in food.
It's delicate.
You got to use it very, very sparingly, but in those moments that it could save you, it's like, yes. Yeah. And what circumstances there, it's like maybe somebody was giving you an answer and it was live and you didn't have the chance to retake that section of an interview, for example. They say something and they're getting to a really brilliant point, but then they have like a sneeze in the middle of it or they cough really loud. It's like, and then they carry on with their brilliant point. And you're like, oh God. And then, you have to take out that really abrupt thing in the middle. So your only hope is that you can use, for example, this morph cut effect to take that cough out, put the two clips together, the start and the finish bit, and if you apply this morph cut on top of it, what it does is like it kind of interpolates the footage to kind of blend them. Yeah. It's not a cross dissolve and it's not a jump cut, but it kind of blends the motion as though they kind of never had that blip in the middle.
It's how I kind of see it because it morphs it, and so it's almost like if you're familiar with like in Photoshop, there's a liquefy type tool. I don't know, it's pretty much just taking that one frame and the other frame, and then morphing it to look like it. So it's really good. Like that's why we say use it sparingly, and it's delicate because the shots have to look similar. So it's really good for talking head, like interview style stuff, because generally they're just standing there and there's not too much motion, or any drastic changes in between the two shots. Yeah. So it's very simple. Whereas, if they're on the right side of the frame, on the one clip, and then the left side of the, it does the morph, don't get me wrong, but you're gonna see that.
Yeah, you're gonna see something weird happen. Yeah. It's like I said, it's like it's used in a very specific instance in an ideal scenario. That morph cut looks very good. It's way better than a jump cut or a dissolve. In the case, particularly again, that you don't have B-roll.
Exactly.
But there's sometimes it's like I need this person to be on camera because they're saying something very sincere, and I need them to be on camera, and that's when that morph cut has saved me. And it's like, that is an amazing thing. But again, if done right, goes unnoticed, people don't know, and then you can be like, haha, I got that one kind of thing. So it's a great thing.
Yeah. So I think that's everything I think we wanted to cover in regards to, you know, the things that go unnoticed in the realms of video production and the unsung heroes that do put in that time and that effort, that do it right, you know, because we've both been in that situation where things that go unnoticed and you don't, and it's kind of bittersweet because you don't get the reaction, you don't get like the whoa, because you know, there are those times where we put the effects in and, you know, it's like a blatant effect that they're like, oh, that's cool. But then at the same time, something that you patch up or whatever you do to blend in something and just goes unnoticed, there is that kind of reward to it because you know you did the job right if nobody is like complaining or drawing attention to and being like, well, that looks fake or that looks weird, out of place or whatever it be, or that sounds really loud or very jarring or terrible, whatever it be. It just goes a long way when, you know, it's done right and it achieves what you want to do within the context of the video.
All you get to really do is pat yourself on the back in those moments, like, job well done, me.
Really, exactly.
More or less.
Yeah. And that's why that's why we're calling this segment, you know, those unsung heroes, because credit to those people who do put the time and effort into executing on these things to make things seem natural or believable within the shot, both visually and audibly.
Yeah,
audibly. I don't know what the proper word there would be.
I think it would be audibly.
Audibly?
But I like audibly.
That's all, folks.
Speaking of which, we're done here.
Yeah, we are done.
If you have any questions on this stuff, feel free to message us because I'm sure there's going to be people that have a sticky point that they're trying to work themselves out of.
And as you know, we stated through the video, YouTube this stuff. Like, there's so many examples out there, and it's actually quite baffling to see the amount of effort, what people do to pull things off, whether it's CG or audio based.
Yeah, it's pretty neat.
That said, thanks for watching, thanks for listening, and tune in next time.
See ya.
Thanks for watching this episode of the Video Island podcast brought to you by Vidyard. You can subscribe to the audio version on your favorite podcast platform or check out more videos here.